Okay, we're going to continue to dig deeply into this subject, and we're now going to go on to the subject of corporate real estate and mobility. And we've got a trio of speakers who are going to interact with each other. So I'd like to welcome Ziona Strelic, Director of ZZA Responsive User Environments. Hello, Ziona. I'd like to welcome Ben Munn from the MD of Enterprise Services Regis. And we haven't got Tom Keeney, but we have got, because he's been called away from BT, but we are very pleased to welcome Tom Ball of Neardesk. Hello, Tom. So if you'd like to take your cue, we're going to kick off with Ziona, who's going to both introduce and facilitate this session. Wonderful. Great. Okay, floor is yours.
Hello everyone, great to be here, and really good to be able to talk through this question with you, which I think has been pregnant throughout the morning. Great big office buildings, do we still need them? So I think there's no doubt after what we went through this morning that what I think is the kind of mantra of our times, staff attraction, staff retention, staff motivation. There cannot be anyone here who's not heard that, because we heard it over and over again this morning. And what really strikes me about this is that it's been central to the business case for project after project after project that I've seen. And for most of us, at least many of us here, we've all procured assignments off the back of it. So what is my problem with this proposition? Well, throughout the many years gone by, I've been a judge of workplace awards. And as we moved forward into towards the millennium and then into the noughties, there was suddenly this explosion of what in retrospect I can only call supply-side glory. The big consolidations, big buildings, big campuses, full of photogenic bells and whistles, and leading on to a kind of ratcheting up in the heat of internalized staff amenity. I think the kickstart, many of you will remember, was BA Waterside, with its external running track, its barbecue, its on-site Waitrose. I remember going to see it with a group of judges. We were completely jaw-dropped. And that led on to a ratcheting up of the heat, multiple staff restaurants on site, climbing wall, swimming pool with aerial view. And the protagonists came from a very wide variety of sectors. Who comes to mind? Goldman Sachs, Clifford Chance, GSK, RBS, and many, many others in their wake. And they played to a huge host of awestruck industry peers, all of whom wanted to do even better. So what's my problem? Why am I challenging this? Because my contention is that while all of this trend was muscling in, the horse bolted, if indeed it was ever there at all. And why do I say so? Because through all ZZA's extensive engagement in research with workplace users, we've seen very, very little staff traction with or interest in all of this internalized office content. And I think that the reason is simple. Because despite what Duncan Painter said this morning, and despite my own obsession as a workaholic, all of us have a life, and work is only part of it. So there is all of this other stuff that we all have to fit in, and at the same time, technology has hugely fueled our expectations of convenience and choice. So yes, we do want effective office space, but most of all, what we want is what we want, where we want it, when we want it, and with whom. And yes, very frequently an office will meet the bill, but the big gesture workplace that has the critical mass to offer all the showy kit is typically a one-side proposition. And whilst that's good for some people, inherently it's a strain for others. And so we see people voting with their feet, and what we've heard about a lot today, we see a lot of underutilized workspace. So the reality is that, of course, we want to work where it suits. And insofar as we can, we work in a spatially distributed way, whether or not we're formally designated as agile workers or not. As for the suspicion that this leads to sloughing off, I think that that's very under-evidenced. On the contrary, I think that there's a lot of documented material that shows that most people with engaged jobs, with engaged work, definitely don't want to do their day on most days. And in fact, our research on third places underscores the very, very strong impetus that people have in being propelled to work with other people working around them, and that means towards collective place. So the other thing that our data shows is that people's main priority in selecting where they work is convenient location. There's no question about that. And often the office, that corporate space, will be the place. But at other times, other settings will gain precedence. So in terms of this drive to work in a distributed way, with the recent expansion of the kinds of available settings, the criteria for choice has expanded enormously to much more granularity than location alone. We want to work with people like ourselves in collective places, so the criteria of choice become co-workers, they become ethos, they become cultural factors, and they become price. And so, yes, very, very frequently an office will meet the bill, the office will meet the bill, the company's beating heart will meet the bill, but at other times it might well be equally a cafe, a business centre or a library. Now, I want to talk very briefly about the fact that big statement offices really do offer the kind of potential for kind of significant brand impact, that they're very emblematic, and that has a value for occupier organizations. And we've heard a lot about that today, about brand impact, about the message that you give to your visitors and your staff. But I think what's been hugely underscored in terms of generating business value is the value of contrast. And I think this is extremely interesting, that people often get much more value, and corporates get much more value, by having people work in different kinds of spaces. So hence the folk that I meet in the hub, in the atrium at King's Place, on the terrace at the British Library. And what they tell me that these settings confer to them is really the stimulus of difference, that this becomes a catalyst to thinking outside the box. And why wouldn't it be so? I mean, whenever was innovation born out of more of the same? I mean, it just doesn't add up. So I think that we really need to switch gear from thinking about cloning and reinforcing the corporate we, and thinking about how people can be liberated to generate value by mixing much more with otherness. And so back to the question that we started with, which is Quo Vadis, the great big office building, because clearly that's impinged on as much by the drivers of agility as the people who are working outside corporations. Well, let me say for a start, I'm absolutely convinced that organizations will continue to need their homes. So yes to offices, but I contend that one, they'll be smaller, and two, they'll be much less bounded, they'll be more porous. So where does that take us? Well, I think that the hermetic office building, the less hermetic office building, is already wonderfully exemplified. I think King's Place is the case study par excellence, where we have corporate real estate operating side by side with free third space in a wonderful combination that is very much used actively by a wide range of users, as well as the people in the corporate space upstairs. Future-facing, I'm really delighted to be leading the strategy for the base of the Leadenhall building. It's very, very exciting. It encompasses the whole footprint, and there will be facilities for the shared use of tenants and the public alike. Very exciting. What more do I see in the wings? Well, my proposition is that there is going to be a significant inboarding of pay-as-you-go space into underused office space, the underused office space that we've heard so much about. And facilitated by technology and by concierging, I think this is excellent news because we've got the stock with all its embodied energy, and I think this will provide a really useful strategic lifeline to the continued viability of existing holdings. But more importantly, I think it will become a strategy for running these spaces in a lively and stimulating and productive way, rather than having people rattling around in the Marie Celeste. So those are my views. I look forward to hearing from Ben and then Tom. Thank you.
Thanks, Ziona. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're having a fun day. Right. Let's see if I can... There we go. So, corporate real estate and mobility. Pretty much everyone in the room has delivered some form of mobility into their organisation, I would imagine, from those that I can see behind the lights. I think to the point around the purpose of the office and the home office, as in the corporate headquarters or the core functional centre, etc., I think we're all well aware of levels of utilisation, opportunity cost that goes around that. But some of you will know me from my prior life, where I was an advisor on workplace strategies, and I worked at CBRE doing that before I went to Regus. And one of the things that I noticed was that there were different perspectives on the value of space. And there were different perspectives on how important a company, which is basically made up of people, thought the value of space was for the individuals that worked for that company. And that was demonstrated in the different strategies that were driven through the organisation. So if you were to look at, say, a Google, or a Coca-Cola, or a Clifford Chance, there was a view, and there is still a view, that individual workspace has value for the person whose workspace it is, and that providing that to them has value in and of itself. And the overriding drive or concern was not necessarily the optimization of efficiency and cost reduction that you can gather through that, but actually it was about making that individual feel valued, and to some extent, depending on how cynical you want it to be, about making sure that person was in the office as much as possible, working as hard as they possibly could. So give them everything they need to do that, to live their life, if you like, through work. Now, one of the things that we're beginning to see, and we've been talking about a lot today, is change, mobility, the fact that you can choose where you want to work. And I think as that relates to CRE and mobility, you've got to balance the idea of convenience and choice for large numbers of office-based employees. I think there are about 1.6 million of them or so that come into London to work in office space, with the idea of cost and confidence. So freedom is well and good within certain defined parameters, I would say. But what we see, and this is talking as Regus, if I may, for a moment, is that demand for convenience choice is absolutely there, and that there is interest in looking at how you can provide space which is productive, dedicated workspace in any number of locations, whether that be the central business district, whether that be a hub and spoke connection, whether it can be home workers, because a lot of people do work from home, even if they don't consider themselves home workers, as the point that was made. But then it can be more transient than that. It can be lounges, it can be transport nodes, it can be airports, it can be a whole variety of places, service stations that are opened up to the opportunity of work. And I think the question which I'm interested in, I suppose, around the CRE and mobility piece is what does that fundamentally do to how you think about providing space or providing access to space for your employees? What do you need around the cost and confidence piece, security, etc., to enable you to actually make that part of your strategy going forward? So we're already seeing lots and lots of different approaches to space. We know that variety is the spice of life. Everyone has variety within their portfolios. That variety may be relatively small. It may be meeting space, it may be desk space, and it may be client-facing space. There may be relatively low levels of it, or there may be incredibly high levels of variety that are delivered through your space, and you may indeed get space elsewhere. And I think that idea that you should be able to choose where you work is one that is gaining prevalence, and certainly amongst this kind of audience, I think to Ziona's point, people want to be able to work wherever and whenever they choose. Interestingly, we did a survey of about 20,000 businesses. 77% of them said that enabling people to work in a mobile fashion made them feel more responsible, took more ownership for the work, i.e. that move away from I'm going to watch you, I'm going to make sure you're doing what you're meant to be doing, to I'm not going to watch you, but I'm going to judge whether you're delivering what you said you were going to deliver, is a positive thing if people want to take it on. So if you can enable people to work wherever and whenever they choose, but you're basing hopefully the judgment on their success around outputs and what they're delivering, then you begin to think, well, why couldn't we work anywhere? Why shouldn't I be able to work in the Gherkin? Why shouldn't I be able to work in my corporate HQ? Why shouldn't I be able to create my social networks within work how I choose, like PwC were saying? And then you begin to take it further, right? And then you say, well, I have to travel around, so I should be able to have access to places of work. I'd like to be able to do that, whether it's a Starbucks, whether it's somewhere else or not. And one of the things which we have started thinking about is why should you have to stop working when you're traveling? Everyone has probably worked on the train, so people have worked on buses, etc., etc. Planes. Who finds working on a plane productive? Can I ask why? When you say it's productive, what is... Huh? No phone calls. No distractions. Become very focused, right? Is that... As long as your battery lasts. So as long as your technology works, the plane is a very good place to do work. Now, interestingly, and this is a slight diversion, but I thought you would be interested to hear it. There was a recent study done by a guy called Andy Yap at Berkeley, and it's called, I'll just tell you the name, I won't tell you what it's about. It's called The Ergonomics of Dishonesty. And I would recommend that you all go and have a look at it. It is a very, very interesting view of what space does to people's morals and their behaviour. It's a very, very interesting read. The reason I mention that is that planes are also relatively confined spaces, and that has an impact on how we behave. Anyway, how does this all impact kind of the future and what you can do? I think the important thing that we're interested in, hopefully, is how people are productive. From a corporate, from a company perspective, if someone is working, you want them to be working productively, and you want to be working at the right time. You want them to be generating value for your organisation. You want to know, I would think, that that is being done in a safe environment, that it's being done in a sensible way. So one of the things that we've been thinking about is we can put points of access wherever we like to work environments. There is no reason that there can't be work happening wherever you like. But then, of course, you get onto the issue of what happens between the points of access. So you're either working in your plane seat or something else. So one of the things which we have been thinking about is, well, why should you stop working when you're on the move? And most people don't. Most people already, will be working on BlackBerries, et cetera, et cetera. But one of the ideas that we had was, with driverless cars, right? All of you have seen this. Google have applied to Nevada for licenses for their driverless cars. Well, in that case, why shouldn't your driverless car become a place of work? Why shouldn't it be designed for a place of work? This is something that I hope you're going to see next year. And on the right, well, if that's not, if that's the case, why not making places that are for work wherever there is movement going? So you can choose to work whenever you want, but with confidence, with the security you need, and so on and so forth. I think the interesting thing for us to think about is, what impact does that level of option, that level of, if you like, I suppose, disaggregation and virtualization of where work can happen, what impact does that have on your demand, and what impact does it have on the way that you think about providing space? And really what you're talking about, I think, is about providing time in the right space to be most productive. So I look forward to hearing your thoughts on that as we go into the debate. Tom?
I got a phone call on Friday night to say, could I join a panel debate today? So the briefing notes I had was that I was joining a debate rather than giving a presentation. Which is probably good, because I would have passionately agreed with everything that's already been said, so we can skip that bit. One thing Ben doesn't know is I once lost a bet in a pub, and I now own a boardroom on a bus. So I'm a big believer in working anywhere. That's a story for another time. So my background is I've been a consultant over the last 10, 15 years, and I was one of these workers in different places. And I was in Sheffield one day, and I wanted to get some work done, and there was a wonderful desk, a place I could work. And I said to people in reception, can I work in that desk there for the next 2 hours, please? And they said, certainly, no problem at all. It's £1,000 a year. I'm like, no, I'm here for 2 hours, and I just want to use that desk there for the next 2 hours. And I kind of call it the cheese sandwich problem, that you can't, for space, you walk into a cheese sandwich shop and you ask for a cheese sandwich, and you can buy one cheese sandwich. In real estate terms, you have to buy 1,000 cheese sandwiches a day for the next 6 months, or you have to buy years unlimited cheese sandwiches at one shop. Wouldn't it be great if you could just wander around and you could just buy cheese sandwiches anywhere you wanted them? So the idea was, wouldn't it be great if somebody invented an Oyster card for renting office space by the hour? So for having talked about it for years, I decided I had to either do something about it or shut up. So that's what we've done. The worldview that we come from is there's different parts to using space. It's really been covered very, very eloquently. The mothership of a corporate HQ is always going to be there, I believe, incredibly powerful. Going to the gym is a really good thing to do, but don't do it 40 hours a week. Going to the mothership, being your colleagues, is a really good thing to do, but you don't need to do it 40 hours a week. For me, there's the other. So there's the central London problem, which is not literally central London, but the HQ problem. But the bit I find more interesting is the other end of the train line. The average commute in the UK is 8.5 hours a week, not just in London, the whole of the UK. So we're spending a day a week travelling to an office when we don't need to every single day. So the bit that really excites me is the idea that we will go to the mothership, but we won't go there every single day. So the idea that you can work near home, and for some people that will mean at home, but for lots of us it will mean that's not a great space for a short period and not a great space for a long period. And the biggest frustration we come across is people think that this magic wand they've been given of flexible working gives them exactly 3 options. The only place it's possible to work is the place an hour away that you go to every single day, your own bedroom in your pyjamas, and occasionally for half an hour Starbucks. And we believe that the magic wand's more powerful than that, and you could work anywhere. And I hope that in the future we get better and better options. And I'm actually going to cheat and use my notes because I just frantically wrote some things down. In many years ago, some people came over from Russia, apparently, and they studied London for several days, and they're very, very confused. And they said, we don't understand. Who is it that decides how much bread London needs? And the fact that a market would be capable of solving that problem, they found quite strange. But I think that's what will happen, is we'll end up with, I will choose different things to you, you will choose different things this week to next week, and there'll be lots and lots and lots of different options. And some people will be introverts and want to be hidden away, some will be extroverts and want to be out there and meeting people. Some people will like different types of thing and want spaces in different places. Back to who are the new entrants that are coming into this? It's an unbelievably fragmented market. I mean, Regis are obviously by far the market leader, but even they're 10% of UK locations in serviced office space, and serviced office space is 3% of commercial real estate. So that's 0.3%. The other 99.7% is now starting to wake up. And the most interesting thing I've seen recently is Tesco's just launched a chain of coffee shops called Harrison Hall. They're the major investor in there, and they seem to be explicitly for working mothers. So it's for a place you can work and take a child at the same time. But there's so many things going to be happening in the space. So I think we're now going to go to debate.
Thank you very, very much for stepping in. I mean, all of you have done a really interesting job on corporate real estate and agility. I absolutely love Ziona's. Ziona has a very good with the bon mot, and supply side glory, I think, is the phrase of the day to describe flagship offices and getting little staff traction. And of course, you asked, why there's going to be a significant inboarding of serviced office space into underutilized corporate buildings. Ben talked about working on the move and creating dedicated space, and Tom with his Oyster card to buy space. The question I've got for all of you, what is stopping businesses making the move into a more flexible property model? What are the barriers to change for the companies? Why aren't they letting serviced office into their buildings? Why aren't they sending their staff out? Tom.
I think it's very simple. It's just one of inertia, that big corporates are and kind of should be a big oil tanker that takes quite a long time to move. And it's only been possible, we've only had the cloud and we've only had 3G, 4G fairly recently. And I think they are starting to move that way. The average corporate is spending £14 an hour on the desk that the person sat there. So if anyone that's earning 40,000 or more in central London, the desk earns more than the person. So I think they are starting to move that way now.
I think there are a multitude of reasons. I think the market has not necessarily been there, and there hasn't necessarily been the confidence that the market can actually provide cost confidence over a period of time to do this. I think to Tom's point, the kind of the realization hasn't necessarily been there, and then there are a variety of other reasons which a lot of you will have experienced around regulation, internal process, change management. When you're talking about turning a tanker, it takes a lot of effort, and most of the effort normally is going on running the business. And so getting the attention of the people that need to influence that decision, as many of you will know, is sometimes somewhat challenging. So I think getting people to do things differently is difficult, and then aligning all the different pieces that need to agree to it can be difficult. However, I would say that we are beginning to see that. There are lots of companies in this room that are beginning to take a more flexible approach, and it may be starting with what you might call the low-hanging fruit. It might be sales offices. It might be actually growing into space that is more flexible rather than taking a more traditional chunk of space with all of the prediction and guesswork that goes around headcount. And I think everyone here will understand what I mean by that. It's an incredibly difficult thing for most companies to do, to accurately predict how many people they're going to have working for them and exactly where they're going to need them to be working at any given 5-year, 3-year or 10-year planning period. So I think it is beginning to happen. I think there are institutional barriers. I think there have been market barriers. But certainly, and I guess I would say this, right, sitting at Regis, we are beginning to see a lot more demand for this. And our estimate, not just looking at ourselves, but also looking at the market and the kind of aggregator technologies that Tom and his company is providing, is that expectation, access and liquidity that can come in with the desire for flexibility and cost management, I think will continue to drive this, and will continue to drive an appetite to see this kind of model.
Okay.
I think the biggest barrier actually is really concerns about coherence. I think it's coherence in companies where all of the business streams can join up to take a unified decision. But it's very much the concern about the Marissa Mayer point, will my company stay coherent if we allow people to dissipate? And actually, I think that a much more useful question to asking why haven't more people bitten the bullet and divested themselves of fixed assets and gone completely liquid is to say we are in a revolution, we are negotiating new kinds of modalities, and who has taken incremental steps towards a more liquid approach? And then I think we have some very, very encouraging answers. So, for example, we've done studies of workplace transformation with some very big corporates. We've studied Birmingham City Council, which moved from over 80 separate buildings to 8, and that comes with some redundancies, yes, some staff attrition, but it also comes with much more agility. It comes with the idea of saying that, there was a good example this morning, that social workers can spend time at social work, but I think the far more interesting case study that we have to quote is from BT, and I kind of think that BT are always about 10 years ahead of the real estate curve of everyone else. And they've been through this consolidation story with the fancy award-winning buildings that I talked about, and came out the other end and divested themselves of these and went into disaggregation. We've studied people who've moved from Class A award-winning space with the hairdresser and the music room and the restaurants and gone into pockets of space in existing operational buildings that BT had to keep for technical reasons. Very basic space, but yes, it was effective. It did what it had to do for effectiveness, but what it did much more importantly was to provide smaller disaggregated units of space that people could get into the building more quickly, out of the building more quickly, and actually know the other people who are working there. And I think that the reason that I'm referencing this is because it becomes an internal innovator within a company that actually replicates the kinds of co-working spaces that other kinds of external and third-party providers are making available.
Yeah. Very, very interesting. The BT story is a very interesting one. I blush at this point because some of you may know I wrote a trilogy of books with Philip Ross, including the Creative Office and the 21st Century Office, full of glory award-winning office buildings. And not long after the 21st Century Office book came out, and it had these big, beautiful buildings and analyses of these, that I met Ziona, and Ziona said to me, for God's sake, Jeremy, I've done the post-occupancy studies on these buildings, and the staff are unhappy about A, B, and C. Then a week later, I'm still reeling from my attack from Ziona. I'm in the States, and I meet an American academic called Wolfgang Preiser, who some of you may have heard of. And he said, for God's sake, Jeremy, these buildings leak. These the companies are spending fortunes on energy, and they're unsustainable, and it's interesting how companies are beginning to retreat. Not Apple with their great big new donut building, but a lot of companies are beginning to retreat from these kind of marquee glory headquarters. Okay, let's throw this open to the floor. Right, lady there. Black dress, sparkly jewellery.
Hi, Linda Crawford from the British Council. We've heard a lot today about agile working and how that tends to move away from traditional cubes into places outside of a traditional office. And that requires quite a lot of trust, I think, from management. Now, obviously, within the British Council, we have workplaces right across the globe. And I wondered, from your perspective, which geographical locations gave you more challenges with that?
Sorry, I'm laughing because we have in Japan. There's a model that we employ, which is a centre, a workspace which is really owned by the people that use it. They look after it themselves and they go in. It's very, very compact. It's in Tokyo, but it allows for the right kind of price, one hopes, the ability to work in a very central location in Tokyo that you wouldn't necessarily be able to achieve through kind of a standard approach to real estate. But it also relies on, the kind of the model relies on the people there looking after it and being very conscious about the way that they use it and being very considerate about each other, and culturally it works. There are lots of other cultures where we wouldn't necessarily put a model like that because it wouldn't necessarily work in the same way. There are different expectations around what you get from service when you provide, when you're paying for a certain thing. So expectations and culture, I think, have a significant impact on the level of trust that's willing to be given to workers. I would say, though, that generally, in my experience, the drive for productive work will often, in the heat of kind of discussion and then decision making, will overcome kind of some natural or kind of cultural barriers to change.
Can I just ask you? I've been to quite a few of the British Council offices around the world. Do the British Council own these buildings, or do they lease these buildings? I mean, what's your operational model?
A combination of all of those.
Right.
So we're moving away from predominantly owned. Most of it's leased. Some of it's in partnership with people. We do flexible working. We do all sorts of things.
Right.
And obviously, we have quite a lot of challenges in some of the countries that we're in, both from infrastructure as well as culturally. So I was just curious to hear from the panel
Right.
what they felt.
I have to make one comment that I think that the issue isn't so much about trust, but what else is available to people across a very wide range of socioeconomic geographies. The opportunity to work at home for some of the time, if you're in Hong Kong or in China, for example, is far less because the domestic space is far more hotly contested than it is here. It's much less available. And so realistically, what you can accomplish in different geographies is different. And we have been, I think, at the forefront here and in the US of this tremendous expansion in third-party provided settings that really do contribute enormously to organizational swing space. I mean, the fact that you can have someone from your organization work in a Regis lounge for the cost of a cup of coffee a day or whatever, or in a Starbucks or at the British Library for free, is a tremendously valuable asset that isn't available in lots of other geographies.
Okay.
Yes, I mean, I do think that talking about the UK sometimes focuses us too much on what we have available here. And we should be looking to other cultures and other geographical locations, and that sometimes sparks ideas for what might happen.
Yeah. Thank you. Other questions? Jim's had lots of goes. Does anybody else want to have another go? If not, we'll go to Jim. Yeah? An observation down here, then we'll go to Jim.
Thank you. They turned my mic off, so I need to hold one. Your question earlier on about why are companies not opening up their spaces to serviced offices, it's very simple. It's not their business. And if you're running a large corporation, you will have certain income streams. If you look at the potential profit that can be made out of renting out a floor compared to the cost of actually running that floor and providing all those services, it doesn't make commercial sense. The return is not going to be big enough. That and the fact that you don't want your building full of other people.
Well, it's not Google's business either, but they've set up Google Campus and they're incubating lots of businesses. Jim?
Can I say very quickly on that? I think there are more and more people that are starting to do things like that, but you're right, operating space, and that's why they're working with partners like Regis and like different operators that will take on their space and do it for them. But I'm seeing more and more examples where people are either doing that or looking to do it. Because there's over 100 million square feet in the UK now where it's occupied and someone's paying the rent, but nobody's actually sat there using it.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was very evocative how much space you showed around the UK. 350,000 square feet in Brighton.
But Regis is becoming a tenant.
Yeah,
So you're subletting it.
yeah.
You're not actually becoming...
We can talk about the deal structures that we can provide, offline. I'm very happy to. Very happy to talk to you about the different offers.
Jim,
thanks.
we've
It's
got a
Jim
couple of
again.
minutes before coffee. So.
Before we go back to Jim, I do just want to contest something that you've said, that there are some forward-looking organisations who are beginning to see that there's a real potential value in being
yeah.
porous and welcoming other people into their space, because they see that as a seam of productive, synergistic interchange. So I think your very bounded view of organisations wanting to keep non-us out is an increasingly dated view.
Okay.
That's all
Right, sorry. Ziona, this is a quick
It is a
one for
debate.
you.
Yeah, sorry, Jim.
This is Jim Reed from Arab again. A quick one for you, Ziona. You gave us a throwaway line earlier on, or as Jeremy would say, a bon mot or mot, and you said that you believed offices were going to get smaller. Now, we've seen the trend for less and less personal space and more collaborative space, breakout space, that kind of thing. So can you just expand a little bit more on what you meant by offices are getting smaller?
No, it's a good question, and I thought what I did not mean to say, and might be something that you picked up, I don't think that buildings will necessarily get smaller, but I mean the amount of space that organisations will take for their own operations will be smaller. And I think that despite the transfer in the space budget from individual space to an emphasis on collaborative space, I think overall space budgets are getting smaller, that occupiers are using less space because they're moving to use their space more efficiently to drive utilisation.
Okay, well, we could go on, and I'm sure we will over coffee. There's now a 20-minute break. Can I say a huge thank you to Ziona, to Ben, and to Tom for this very lively session. And can I thank all the speakers in this strand? It's been great to go into depth. 20 minutes, back for our final session.